morning. I'm Francis Levy. Ed Nersessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and welcome to our inaugural season of Our Life in Poetry. Before we begin this evening's event, I wanted to call your attention first to the art on the walls, actually, which is part of a show called The Body as Image, which has been curated by Hallie Cohen with the assistance of Adam Ludwig. And it's a literal and figurative backdrop for our series of 6 roundtables on sexuality, which commenced with the first one 2 weeks ago, Mating in Captivity, and then last week was the biology of sexuality. We have 4 more. And a lot of people come to the Philoctetes Center and they're kind of not aware of the art on the walls because so much is occurring in the center of the room where we're having the roundtables. But please, take a look at the art, and also the art in the annex and the writing that accompanies it. I am pleased to introduce Michael Braziller. I think many of you know Mike from previous Our Life in Poetry sessions. He's the publisher and president of Persea Books, a literary and educational publishing house he founded in 1975. And he's also the director of the Philoctetes Poetry Program. All Philoctetes programs, parenthetically, are available on our site. We simulcast them, so if you go to philoctetes.org, you can see right now what's going on. And also, if you miss a Philoctetes roundtable, you can't go online at the time it's occurring, you can go to our archive and you simply hit the button, and usually these programs go up 1 or 2 or 3 days after the event, and you can simply see all of our events. Because people constantly are coming up to me and saying, gee, I missed that one. You don't have to miss it, you can see it. So Mike will introduce our distinguished guest and moderate tonight's discussion. Thanks.
Okay, tonight, as you know, we'll be looking at 8 poems by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And Marie Ponsot will be opening with some background and a little context for the poems, and I will be asking her questions, and I think you should all feel free to ask questions as we go through these complex and difficult poems. Also, the evening will conclude, and make sure to leave time, because Marie is going to read at least two of her own poems, and she'll be happy to sign copies of her book. Marie Ponsot is a native New Yorker who enjoyed teaching at Queens College, Beijing United University, and Columbia University. Among her awards are an NEA Creative Writing Grant, the Delmore Schwartz Memorial Prize, the Shaughnessy Medal of the Modern Language Association, and the Frost Medal for Lifetime Achievement. Ponsot's most recent collections are The Birdcatcher, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry in 1998, and Springing, New and Selected Poems. Okay, Marie, would you like to talk a little about Hopkins?
Yes, I would.
Okay,
I
good.
have written some notes because Hopkins is a subject about which I could talk for a long time, and I don't intend to do that. You will be happy to know. I want to start how nice, what a lovely sound. By saying a little bit about Hopkins' own life. I wrote down the kind of thing he liked, that most of which stayed with him all his life. He was one of 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls. One of the boys died in infancy, so it really was a family of 7 children with which he grew up. He was the eldest, which, as we all know, is a rather magical role with all sorts of things attached to it. They certainly were true of him. I believe that he indulged in a great deal of horseplay with his younger siblings, which is something that I know from my own experience is likely to happen with the eldest. He liked to sketch, he liked to read, he liked to look at things. He took walks. He took the whole crew of his siblings on walks. And he began, in very young, his favorite sport, fishing. That stayed with him all his life. He wrote some several great poems after coming home from a fishing trip. His father was reasonably well placed, and he went to a good school and then on to Oxford, where he eventually, in 1867, that's the year my grandmother was born, in 1867 took a first in Greats, which means that he studied classics and philosophy. And to take a first at Oxford, of course, is not easy, but he did it with no problem. At the same time, he was very involved with the religious drive of his time, which was to break away from the Anglican Church, the Church of England, and move toward Roman Catholicism. The great example had been set 15 years before by John Cardinal Newman, who has a great work called The Idea of the University, which those of you who have any academic connections ought to look at once in a while. It will make you die with longing. His premise is that now you don't really need to do anything because you've learned 4 languages and you know all these historical facts and settings, and you can just coast in your favorite field. Well, he also said that my favorite phrase of Newman's is that the university should be a place which is a conversing community of scholars. That's not where I worked, but maybe some of the rest of you have had that experience. He hesitated long over becoming a Roman Catholic, walked around and debated it with himself, stayed up nights praying that he would be able to make the right decision, and eventually he did become a Catholic. He was received into the church in 1966, the year before he got his degree, by none other than John Cardinal Newman. In 1968, he decided that he was going to be a Jesuit, and he burned his poems. He said about that, I always thought, because of the way I was taught, that he was prohibited as a Jesuit from writing poems. I found that very puzzling, because Jesuits write all the time, but that was what I was taught. No, not so. He did it all on his own before he became a Jesuit, thinking that poems would interfere with my state and vocation unless I can envision writing as a dutiful exercise. So, the early poems, what we have of the early poems is nothing like what he did later on, and we don't really miss them very much, so I guess he was right about that. I want to say a little bit about the Jesuits and about being a Roman Catholic of this kind. You have to think of it first as a revolutionary act. This was a very bold, daring thing to do. Nobody he knew, except for 2 friends, wanted him to do it. And they were in the same spot he was, slightly revolutionary and about to become Catholics themselves. When he chose the Jesuits, he chose something quite appropriate for someone with an Oxford first, because Jesuits have, after they have a BA, 8 or 9 years more of study of a rather intense kind. And that was his experience. 2 years as a novice, 3 years in philosophy, and 3 years in theology. What else would you like to know about his life that I could quickly tell you? Well, let me tell you a little bit about the Jesuits. The training and practice, and by practice I mean repeated actions that bring something to the point where you've internalized it, right? Their formation, they call it formation, is formative. It changes people's habits of action to a rather large extent. One of the things they do that is unusual is that they talk to each other in Latin or at least they did in Hopkins' day, and they did right through say, the 1950s, after which my knowledge of them evaporates. He went through all the process of all those steps and was ordained in 1977.
It was a very rigorous, isolated, highly structured.
Highly structured.
Yeah.
There were usually maybe 150 Jesuits, so the isolation was heavily companioned with companions you hadn't necessarily chosen, but you got to consider them as your brothers. One of the practices of the Jesuits, which certainly is intensified in Hopkins, was a practice that fit his original character very well. He was a little boy who made lists of words. He loved funny words, fascinating words, and he would make lists and then he would try to classify them and do that sort of thing. Well, that was very acceptable to the Jesuit way of thinking, that sort of mulling over things. He was trained in the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, which is an Aristotelian, a post-medieval version of Aristotle, anyway. So that some of the things that we are familiar with from his poems are encouraged. One of Aquinas' principles is nihil est in intellectu quod non prius fuerit in sensu. Whatever is not in the senses is not in the mind. Where the mind comes from is the senses, and it was a vision of the human animal as an interactive body and mind. So that fit Hopkins very well because he was sensually very perceptive. He was a great observer, an incredible observer, and that's what he liked to do. It was refined by the Ignatian Jesuitical requirement that you undertake a yearly set of Ignatian exercises designed by Saint Ignatius, who founded the order. And they consisted in, they were very structured, and I won't bore you with the whole structure, but basically what they asked you to do was to examine intently, as if it were in front of your eyes, some aspect of the life of Christ. And you didn't just like do that the way you and I might, oh yeah, well, that was this, you know, and that's over. It was not just a narrative. You were asked to examine what it looked like, what it smelled like, was it warm, was it cold, every detail about it you were supposed to picture in your mind, and to picture the characters in the story interacting and doing whatever they were doing in quite a great lot of detail. You can see how for someone like Hopkins, who was used to noticing nature in that way, he was well furnished with an active imagination, and this developed it. Early on, he conflated, I think, his feelings about poetic inspiration and the religious reaching for God that he experienced. It's very important to say that he believed in God in a way that he was a very ethical and a quite conservative ethically person, but that wasn't to him the active part of religion. The active part of religion for him was more spiritual, more along the lines of John of the Cross, who had a contemplative nature. Practicing the exercises of Ignatius is what Catholics call meditation. It's not what we call meditation now. What we call meditation now is what Jesuits would call contemplation. It's greatly dependent on grace. That is to say, God gives it or withholds it at his will, for his reasons, which are unknown to you. I say this because it is a striking power in those late sonnets that they call the terrible sonnets. That's where all that comes from. That longing for a grace that was not experienced by him as it had been. John of the Cross, who has written extensively about the nature of contemplation, says that spiritual dryness, is what he calls it, is typical of the dark night of the soul. I don't think Hopkins had read, I'm quite sure he hadn't read Joan of the Cross, but that certainly is the state that he experienced when he was writing those last poems. You remember the last line of one of them, "Thou art indeed just, Lord." He ends that poem by saying, "Mine, O Lord of life, send my roots rain." And that's, I think, the connection. He had another important experience besides being ordained as a priest in 77. He read a philosopher other than Aquinas. They read a lot of philosophy, and most people went right through Duns Scotus and came out the other side. Well, we're not going to do that. It was right up Hopkins' alley. As a matter of fact, they were intellectual soulmates, because what Scotus values with a kind of a rapturous attention and need for attention is the individual reality. He wanted the individual to cultivate individuality by the kinds of information he was taking in. Mm-hmm. He wanted you to observe the fretty chervil right down to the last little leaf. He wanted you to observe the falcon in all its actions, and not just falcon as in the Audubon Handbook, but each falcon. All of these creatures in Scotus' vision belonged in a vast, valuable set of occupants of a hierarchy that was real, valuable, important, and culminated in a kind of pyramid with God at the top of the hierarchy. Everybody else participated in that godness. So that affected Hopkins very gravely. He took that right to heart and did it for the rest of his life. It had one poor effect. He had hoped to be what they call a professed Jesuit, which means that you are on the fast track in Jesuit circles. You get more and more power and more different kinds of encouragement, and you do an extra year of studies. He failed the exam to take that extra year of studies, because instead of giving Thomistic answers to the questions, which it was a philosophy exam, he gave Duns Scotus answers. Mm-hmm. And they were horrified, so did them in. Did them in. I want to get to the poems, so of course that's right.
Yeah, and the I don't know what order you'd like to. I'd like to read. You can start, or I could read one, or we can alternate and try to get as many of these. You picked 8, and I think the immediate thing that we'll all notice, or all, if you've read these poems, is the amount of experimentation and the incredible originality of diction and syntax that seems a little bit at odds with the portrait that, the Jesuit, the portrait you've just
He
you
could
know,
do all that too, but he didn't want to.
Yeah. So that's just to prepare you for the first poem that we'll look at. Where would you like me? I wasn't sure of the order. Thou art. You want me to read "Thou art indeed just, Lord," or?
No, I think I'd like to divide this into two parts, if that's all right.
Go right
with you.
ahead. Whatever you.
My thought is that Hopkins could be called someone who experienced very intensely and very non-medically bipolar order. It was not a disorder, it was the order of his life, as it is for most of us, by the way, in my opinion. We swing between joy and the lack of joy, and the joy again and then no joy. And he swung a little harder and further, right to the point of tipping. You know how you pray your children won't do that and crash the swing? So I thought it would be good, if you wouldn't mind, to start with Pied Beauty, maybe?
Okay. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire coal, chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him.
One of the things about this poem that relates very closely to his Jesuit experience is, I remember this well from my brother, at the top of every page of his homework, and they always had lots of homework. AMDG was what they wrote, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam. So this poem is framed that way, glory be to God. That's the Jesuit motto, to the greater glory of, but everything you do is ad major, is to the greater glory of God. And their goodbye was usually some form of Laus Domini, praise God. So the poem is framed by these two Jesuit expressions.
Are dappled things sort of more, is he characterizing them as sort of more plain and homely things? In other words, what? Why couple color? Are these? Yeah.
He's talking about he's singling out from all the massive things the ones that are multicolor or bicolor,
right,
that the light strikes in different ways and makes splotches of light or differences in color. The one I like is the trout.
The trout is
I've always been very fond of that trout.
Now that's an image of it, the whole thing, rose moles all in stipple. That's a spotted trout, like, are those the spots? The spots on a trout,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
A brook trout, maybe a brown. All trout have rainbow trout. Yeah, that's an amazing rose moles all in stipple up.
One of the things that's easy to look at. He liked structure a lot, and although we are so dazzled that we don't even. I didn't for years. I read him in my early teens, and I was dazzled, and I never thought about, well, what's he trying to say here?
Yeah.
You know, it took me 10 years to get to that level. And
Well, if ever, I've read, I mean, when we look at Spring and Fall to a Young Child, and a lot of these poems, many of them are examples that it's really it's in the diction, it's in the music, it's in the whole sense and feel of the thing, that in a way we can get more out of it than trying to analyze every single,
That's true. That's true. But in some, especially these earlier ones, the structure is really visible. The first line is an abstraction. What he wants to talk about is dappled things. Not everything in the world, but dappled things.
Right.
And then he gives the examples, 1, 2, 3, 4. Skies, trout, fire coal, chestnut falls, finch's wings.
And then he sums up the all things counter, original, spare, strange.
Yes, well, he keeps doing that. He has two more large ideas that he then divides up. The landscape is plotted and pieced, fold and fallow and plow. There are 3 parts to it. And then he speaks about trades, which is the first time that I ever saw anything like that in poetry when I was in my teens. And all trades their gear and tackle and trim. So he divides that into 3 parts. And then he goes to that, he sort of keeps going with that idea of all things counter, original, spare, strange, fickle, freckled. And the thing that is to me striking about that long list of adjectives, line after line, crowded with adjectives, we have to remember that in its very nature, the adjective is very close to an abstraction. Because what it does is abstract from the thing one of its qualities and name that quality. And that's an abstraction. You're pulling back from the thing to your idea about the thing you've noticed. So all those adjectives, crowded the way they are, have a little air of something abstract. And then he gets to that famous Platonic couple, swift, slow, and the other opposites, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. Sets of opposites. And he does that a lot, I think. At various points, you see the way he contrasts one thing with another.
And these great compound words that he uses. Yeah. Fresh fire, cold chestnut, falls.
He loves to do that.
And are you all aware, are you seeing, I mean, the way that he uses syntax, he presses it and stresses, he muscles forward, he pushes words around, and yet, once you get into the poem, it reads with a very heightened clarity, I find at least. And although there's initially, I would call him a very difficult writer, a hard writer to
but it's there, but he doesn't make it easy. He doesn't want to.
He doesn't make it easy. And some of the words he uses, I'm not sure in this poem, but some of the words he uses really could have multiple meanings. I think in that Falcon poem that we'll look at that word buckle in the Falcon. I mean,
that's a killer.
Yeah.
I have my own view about that.
Well,
we all do.
I want to hear it.
Yeah.
But,
but that's a key word of that poem, I think.
Yeah.
He, by the way, when he was an undergraduate, before he was a Jesuit at all, he wrote a paper which has been preserved, accidentally, the way those things are, in which he took great exception to William Wordsworth's dictum that poetry should be as close to prose as you can get it. Right?
Yeah.
He was really indignant.
Okay, would you like to read one?
Yes. Let me see. The window.
Now that's mostly a kind of. It's a poem of praise. It's a poem of finding the great a great order and beauty in the working. And some of these that you talked about, the terrible sonnets.
Yes.
something creeps into some of those, or more than creeps in. Something there's this bipolar thing that you're talking about.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. He goes from one extreme to the other. I mean, Pied Beauty is one example of one of his ecstatic poems.
Right.
And there are a dozen others. Nature is a Heraclitean fire is like that. This is the wind hover.
Okay, hold on.
Hover. I caught this morning, there should be an I there, I don't know where it went.
Yeah.
I caught this morning morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dolphin, dappled dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level, underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy. Then off, forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of the mastery of the thing. Brute, buckle and valor and act, O air, pride, plume, here buckle. And the fire that breaks from thee, then, a billion times told, lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier. No wonder of it. Sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers, oh my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion.
Could you attempt to explain the situation of the poem? Is the bird dropping at the end? Is that?
No, that's not my dear, and that's not the Chevalier.
Okay, well,
I don't think.
Okay.
I think that's the shift at buckle.
Okay.
The brute beauty and valor and act, O air, pride, plume, buckle. This glorious bird is as nothing in its beauty. Its beauty is only a small part of the beauty of his chevalier, his dear.
And that is
that's Christ.
His Christ, right?
And it's the only reading of Buckle which fits the whole poem.
Right.
I think. All the rest of it follows. Sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine. Embers fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. You think something has come to its end. It's burnt out. It's wrecked. And then it drops and exposes its interior coal of gold vermilion. And I think that this is his way of saying that the ugly, dirty, used up figure of Christ coming down off the cross turns around into resurrection. That this Christ fails and is crucified. And that is the nature of his success. I think Hopkins was beginning to feel for that reversal. I think.
Could you make something of the idea that the Chevalier is the falconer calling back the bird, and that it could still be God and the soul?
Yes. What would you do with the fire that breaks from thee then? A billion times told, more dangerous.
Obedience or coming back.
Yes, well, he was strong on obedience, that's for sure. Yeah. I like it that he praises the sheer plod, tramping, doing your dull work out in the field, dragging a plow or controlling a horse that's dragging a plow that you're guiding.
Is Cillian a word, or is that
Cillian.
made up word?
Oh, Cillian. Oh, that was the word that's the first word in Hopkins that I looked up. Oh. And I was thrilled because we used to go to the farm in the summer, right? We were guests at a farm and paying guests. And I had actually seen a horse-drawn plow, and I had seen a Cillian, and I knew that if a sudden rain shower comes up the way it does in the summer very often, and leaves it wet, and then the sun comes out, it shines, it's an amazing thing to see. And there it was. Oh, it's so thrilling. How nice. Thank you for asking. The Cillian is the line in the dirt that the plow makes as it goes along. It turns the dirt to either side. And the bits of stone and stuff and that glitter. And if there's rain, it shines right down the middle. That's one of the rare times that a poet spoke about something that I had actually seen. You know how they make you imagine things, given only their words. That one I'd actually seen.
Could I read Spring and Fall, or is that off? Oh, no, you organized it. You were...
Well, yes, sure.
Okay. This is...
Good.
This is an unusual poem for him. It's more a poem of sort of... Well, there's another person in it.
Yes.
And it's a memorable poem. Also, it's almost completely a poem, or in a way, a poem of the world, or as close as he could come, perhaps, to not being
right.
a religious. It's more. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Let me read it.
Yes.
Spring and fall to a young child. Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove unleaving? Leaves like the things of man you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder. Nor by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of wan would leaf me a lie, and yet you will weep and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same. Nor mouth had, no, nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghost guessed. It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for.
Amazing.
To me, yeah, it's an amazing poem, and to me, an example. It's even before we come to what logic we can make of it, the very music of it,
yes,
and the tone of it,
good, yes, tells
us what that it's about loss and change and learning to accept these things. Right. And a situation is an older speaker talking about younger, and so it's fall and spring, and he is wise to this, and she's just learning about this. But I have a hunch there's something a little more going on to it. It is Margaret that you. It is Margaret.
There was no Margaret. He made her up.
Right.
But he had 3 sisters.
But it is Margaret that you mourn for. Is there something? You talked before about Christ coming off the cross, and something sort of. Is there something religious or about some notion of resurrection or death in
I think it is. I think the blight man was born for is probably in his mind.
Right.
The way we lose our innocence, as it were, our ignorance for the most part, and our ignorance turns into knowledge, but knowledge of something like that includes the fact that we are going to die, and that awareness. And then maybe the blight is death itself. I'm not sure, but something like that.
Isn't it the knowledge of mortality?
Yes. Right. Yes. He knows. We know what's coming eventually. And
Yeah, it's really about, it's not just change and loss, it really is death. There's some,
I think
yeah,
so.
Yeah.
yes.
Isn't she also longing for the child that she was when she had all this capacity to feel things that she no longer can?
When you say she, who do you?
Margaret.
Margaret is mourning her own. Well, that in a way, the loss of innocence is the first ending of something. The loss of childhood is a loss. We see it from the outside more readily than we do in ourselves, maybe.
It seems specifically not a consolation you would ever give a child.
No. Well, you notice that he's not speaking to her. This is.
I mean, the position is so interesting. It's all observed.
Yes, he has several poems that are to ordinary non-religious types, you know, and they are always. He very often says "you," but it's a person he's never spoken to. In this case, Bridges asked him, and he wrote and said, "No, it was someone I imagined," and so Bridges wrote back and said, "Ah, but you had sisters." That's where I got that from.
Yeah, go ahead.
Last Sunday's book review of the Times has a review of a book by Francine Prose, and this poem is the center of that entire book.
Really?
Is it really?
Yeah.
Good for her. What a surprise. Yes. That's terrific. I might have to read her.
It's a famous poem, and it's a poem that you can really memorize quite. Just the music is just, and you know what? It appealed to me. It appealed to me in particular as when I was very, very young. I think there's something. It may not be something that's consoling to say to a young person, but there is something adolescent or youthful about what he's trying to say. I know it appealed to me as a young person, and I know a lot of people who have memorized the poem.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. There's something about this that is, it's an observation of someone arriving at identity, at self-realization, you know, because the loss of innocence is that search for identity and the acquisition of qualities like colder, perhaps.
The consolation, Maggie. The consolation is a lot of it's in the music, not so much in there's something very soothing.
And the tenderness is in the music, right?
Yes.
I find it a very tender poem.
The word unleaving fascinates me because it's almost saying it doesn't depart, as well as that the trees are losing
That's
their
right.
leaves to themselves.
Right. I think every time, I personally, although I certainly couldn't defend this, but I think every time there's something that might be read two ways in Hopkins, he means both of them. He might have a favorite, but he means both of them. Or if there are three, he means all three. He really liked words a lot.
What next? Which we're
Well,
going to move
shall
into
we
a
move
slightly
on?
more.
Yes, we could go very slowly with
Yeah,
anyone.
slowly
You
into
could spend
the-
a month easily on any one of these. I want to recommend to you, what you see me doing here is, I haven't written a whole page of brilliant remarks, just a few down the side. What I have is what I do whenever I want to get a poem better into my head, because where you want a poem is in your mind rather than on the page. I make a copy in my own handwriting. It's not the same as typing it, believe me. The more of your body you get into it, the more it affects your memory. So I recommend that to you.
Well, you almost have to memorize it. You have to go
You
so
find you have
deeply
memorized it. You're trying to figure out what the hell he's after.
I know.
And you discover
Yeah.
that you know lines by heart.
And as you said, if there's certain words that mean practically contradictory things, that it's really only the sense of the thing that's going to guide you in many cases,
Right.
not just the.
Right.
Okay, what would be a good one to read? I want to get into some of the more conflicted ones that you were talking about before.
Yes, well, why don't I read No Worse There Is None?
Okay, go ahead.
A little painscape instead of a landscape. This is the poem that he wrote to Bridges a couple of years later. It was written in blood. No worst, there is none. Pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs will, schooled at 4 pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where is your comforting? Mary, mother of us, where is your relief? My cries heave, herds long, huddle in amain, a chief woe, world sorrow, on an age-old anvil, wince and sing. Then lull, then leave off. Fury had shrieked, no lingering, let me be fell, force I must be brief. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful, sheer, no man fathomed. Hold them cheap may who never hung there. Nor does long our small durance deal with that steep or deep. Here, creep, wretch, under a comfort serves in a whirlwind. All life, death does end, and each day dies with sleep.
Is this one of the terrible songs? Is this one of the,
Yes.
the terrible?
Yep. Yep.
And if this isn't, what is?
And if this isn't what is. Yeah.
This was towards the end of his life, right?
85, yes.
He died in 89, I think. Yeah.
This was one of the first of the strong expressions of distress, I think.
He, I don't know, you touched on his publishing a bit, but he really didn't publish anything in his life, practically nothing, right? It was Bridges who later on began...
At his leisure.
Yeah, I know, but was it 30 years that he
18.
took? But he anthologized him for a while. I put him, I think, in collections with other people, or made some attempt.
Other people did that. The Jesuits did 8 of his poems, some of them heavily edited, but they meant well, you know.
But how long until the first collection, his own collection?
1918. It was 2 years before his mother died. Bridges kept writing his mother saying, oh, surely I will be able to do it this year. But he was poet laureate. He was famous. And kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. So just in time, his mother was 98, and she got to see the poems.
Is he living in Dublin now when he writes? He spent a period towards the end of his life in Dublin, I think, didn't he?
Yes, this was in Dublin.
Yeah.
Yep. And his life there was at the effort to turn University College Dublin, which is now a really eminent institution, into a successful college. It was for people who were smart, wanted a college education in Ireland, couldn't go to Trinity because you had to sign one of those I am a good Protestant oaths. You had to be an Anglican, a Church of England, to go there.
If his peers had seen this writing, I mean, is there some? Is he conflicted in a certain way? In other words, how did he see writing these poems on these doubting and painful subjects? In terms of,
They're not doubting. They're everything else.
Yeah,
They're not doubting.
Yeah.
He knows. He knows he's a wreck.
Question about Trinity. You said you had to sign a statement that you were a Protestant, or were not a Protestant.
He was not a Protestant.
No, I know, but you said, people went to
Had to be Anglican.
go to Trinity.
Yes.
Yes, but Joyce went there. And
No, he didn't.
He didn't?
I beg your pardon. Yes, he went to UCD.
Oh.
Yeah. He couldn't.
Where did he go? Where did Joyce go? University.
Sorry?
Where did Joyce go?
University College.
This turn towards darker poems,
Yeah.
or more upsetting poems. Was there a biographical point in his life that caused this turn, or is it? I mean, you said that he's this bipolar order, and then there's sort of a pendulum swing in his life. But was it just as we did these? Is that pendulum spread over the span?
One of the things that Hopkins never mentioned about himself was that he was very sickly. I think the best authority, as they say, now believe that he had Crohn's disease. He was tired. All of a sudden, he was in a state where he found himself very tired, and he had to drive himself to read the 750 exams, applications for admission to the university. A bitch of a task anyway. Those of us who've read 50 or 200 know it's hell. And he had 750 of them to read. And he drove himself through it. And I think he was exhausted physically. I think he was in bad shape. He had diarrhea. He had hemorrhoids. He had kidney stones. He had all the nuisance possible things happen to his poor body. And he never complained. He soldiered on, So I think it is possible that along with what I would call a kind of a midlife crisis, he also was suffering from physical ailments of various kinds. He even always had trouble with one of the essential things for a Jesuit to do. He had trouble getting up early. He had to haul himself out of bed, by the back of his neck every day. Just wanted to sleep on, poor thing. The 4 sonnets that he wrote, by the way, that are called the terrible sonnets are I Wake and Feel the Fell of Dark.
Right.
And No Worst. And then he also wrote Patience, Hard Thing. Do without, take losses, and obey, he says in that one.
Yeah.
Well, I was just curious if he had a companion, or was he alone his whole life?
No, he lived with fellow Jesuits.
Oh, okay, so he never married or
No,
had
never.
I didn't think he was still a Jesuit when he went to Dublin.
You didn't think what?
Okay.
Yeah.
No chance.
Is there any evidence he was struggling with his sexuality?
Well, we can know as much as that about that as more about that in his case than with most people. For quite a few years, I forget in what year he stopped. I think it might have been 80. But he kept a diary. According to the Anglican, there was a thing that Anglicans do. I think in the day of Barbara Pym, they were still doing them. I don't know if you know her novels, but she's a wonderful novelist. And she mentions it. People would prepare to go to confession by writing stuff down. So Hopkins kept a kind of a diary of whatever he did that he thought he shouldn't have done. And he records all his wet dreams, for example. and rates them for the degree of acquiescence that he gave to their occurrence. Or, I mean, so, and there's no, nothing in there about having sex with another person at any point. So I doubt that he did. Most people you can't feel quite so sure of, whatever, thank God, nobody knows what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Let me read.
Fantasies, were they about men or women, or isn't that recorded?
I don't think they started as fantasies. I think they.
We can gossip,
Yeah.
and we can guess.
You can speculate.
We can speculate. My guess would be men, but that's just a guess.
Well,
and
he's
it's
very
gossipy.
articulate on that subject also. We do know certain things about him. And his word was dangerous. He greatly admired
What?
beautiful people. And many of the ones he admires are men.
Yes.
But many of them are women. So it's a little hard to say in any absolute kind of way, because he wasn't practicing, he wasn't.
But the question might have come about because you do get a sense of a struggle, of somebody sort of struggling with oneself. I mean, struggling with these terrible sonnets, of struggling with one's depression or urges or desire, and wanting to
He wanted
wanting to be
inspiration.
higher, wanting inspiration, wanting
That was the way
yeah.
he thought about it anyway.
Yeah. Let me read, in light of the question there, let me read, "Thou art indeed just, Lord."
Oh God, I'm glad you're reading it. It makes me cry.
I'm not going to, could you read the Latin? Is that?
Oh,
Or I'll.
sure,
Okay.
yeah, no problem. Justus quidem tu es Domine, si disputam tecum. Verum tamen justa loquar ad te, quaere via impiorum prosperetur.
Thou art indeed just, Lord, if I contend with thee. But sir, so what I plead is just. Why do sinners' ways prosper? And why must disappointment all I endeavor end? Wert thou my enemy, O thou my friend, how wouldest thou worse, I wonder, than thou dost defeat thwart me? O the sots and thralls of lust, do in spare hours more thrive than I that spend, sir, life upon thy cause. See banks and breaks, now leaved how thick, laced they are again with Freddie Sherville. Look, and fresh wind shakes them. Birds build, but not I build. No, but strain, time's eunuch, and not breed one work that wakes mine, O thou Lord of life. There's a line, send my roots rain.
Yeah, that's the line. I read that and cry. I've never taught it in class
Right.
for that reason. Seems like such a reasonable request. I don't think that, I'm not sure about this, but I will tell you quite frankly how I feel about it. I think that our tendency to interpret everything as sexual is exactly like Hopkins' irresistible impulse to think of everything as religious. It's the same. They're both taken as a center, as that from which rays come out that blanket everything. And I'm a little bit like Duns Scotus in following Hopkins' example of paying more attention to the uniqueness of the individual. I don't know that either of those generalities is any good. I think you have to entertain both of them and many other possibilities.
Well, this is a poem. I mean, it's reductive to see it as just sexual. I mean, it's it's about an experience we all have of not
Yes.
owning up to ourselves, of boredom, of ennui, of being non-productive, and of
Right.
waiting for some form of inspiration or
Right.
something.
And the egg and bite of inwit. Yep. I think that the phrase that leads us a little bit to think of something sexual is Time's eunuch. He spoke of himself as a eunuch in his letters to Bridges at least 10 times, probably more. But he would say, you know, by it he meant the time was cutting him off. And that's his punning entrance into things, you know.
But is that because of something about the work, about the poems as not being a substance worthy?
Are you suggesting that the
He could only write them now and then. He wasn't.
roots reign? Do you see that as something relating to his writing? Is that what made you think of that? I mean, send my
yes.
roots
I'm
reign.
just thinking
Yeah.
of what Marie said, if by being a eunuch, he at least partly meant that time was cutting him off, that he had nothing
To show
to
for it.
leave behind,
Right.
no heir. And there's something about the poems that is in some way illegitimate to be his work. His work is supposed to be to serve God, and how there's conflict between serving
Well,
God
I think
and
he
wishing
came
that
to a
it was
point
your
in
work.
which he didn't feel that as a conflict anymore. He did feel it was his duty. The thing that he was looking for was a dutiful exercise.
He got there.
Yes, yes. Before any of these terrible poems, somewhere in just before he went to Dublin, forget where he was. He was in some boys' school teaching Greek.
Doesn't the story go that he was ordered by his superior in the Society of Jesus to start writing the poetry, that they found the writing on a napkin, and they said that Gerard Manley Hopkins, clearly you have a talent, you must write poetry.
I don't know. That sounds like a good story to me. I wish it were true. The only encouragement he ever got was in '75 when a ship went down, and that glorious poem, "The Wreck of the Deutschland," was someone mentioned it at the table during their conversational hours, and his superior said to him, "Somebody ought to write a poem about this," and he took that as permission and wrote the poem. Thank God. I mean, that's an amazing poem. And anything that we know about the state of his mind at that time comes in the first part of that poem before he starts describing the accident and the death of these people on board ship.
How did people know that he was writing poems at all?
Robert Bridges, who much later became the Poet Laureate of England, was in constant correspondence with him.
They were friends?
From the 60s on. Constant correspondence, maybe every couple of months they wrote each other, but yes.
Bridges was very ambivalent, or very not always encouraging to him.
No, on the contrary, he thought his work was terrible.
Right.
But talented. He kept trying to straighten it out. And
did he have any encouragement from what I read? You know, did
Yes, he did, from Dixon.
Oh, that's right.
Dixon had been his headmaster in the school that he went to in high school, and moved out of that job, I think, to Oxford. I'm not sure, but I think to Oxford, not Cambridge. And was writing poems that Hopkins liked and wrote to tell him so and why. And that was a place of poetic exchange. If we look at the terrible sonnets and we look at the other poems that he wrote during that time, the poems of great exultation and excitement and bliss are very few. There really are very few of them.
There's a question back here.
I thought that there was that he really experienced a kind of a disappointment in his career too, when he was assigned to Ireland and he didn't really want to go, but in this commitment to obedience, he of course went. Yeah. But it represented
That's right.
everything he didn't want to be. There teaching at University College in Dublin. I don't even know if he taught or did he just do
He
his
did, yes, he taught, yes, indeed he did, yes.
But I think he didn't feel that the atmosphere of Ireland friendly to...
It was not friendly. Every time he opened his mouth, he sounded like Oxford. Nobody liked him.
Yeah.
And he
Yeats,
was also...
Yeats didn't like him. He met Yeats once. And
he didn't like Yeats.
Oh, right.
He thought he was a terrible writer. And at that point, Yeats was a terrible writer.
I think he said Yeats wrote a few good lines.
Oh, well, later on, yes. Yes, no, he did in the one poem he liked.
Wasn't there a political difficulty he was having? Was he against?
He felt very strongly.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Before he went to Ireland, he felt on the side of England.
Right.
That the Irish were just brawling. Once he got there and he saw what was going on, he was really conflicted because he wanted to love Mother England, and here she was making this mess. He knew that home rule was the right thing, and it went against, a further separation from his family, even worse than being a Catholic, probably, if they'd known. They were very bad times in Ireland, and very cruel times in so many ways.
How did his family feel about his converting?
Sorry?
How did his family, his brothers and
Oh,
sisters?
well, his mother was desolate and his father was angry. One of his brothers, Lionel, I think, came to see him and had a terrible time and made a spectacle of himself by saying rude things to the superior.
He seems to have just drifted off his father was very upset, and he seems just to have drifted off and went his own way. There wasn't even big battles or big discussion.
No, he wrote a lot of, the person he stayed closest to was his sister Kate.
Right.
His letters to his mother are the kinds of letters that good boys write to good mothers, and back. They were that kind of exchange. Wear your galoshes, dear, But his sister Kate, he was very playful with her and made jokes and told her things,
I have two questions. When he taught, what did he teach, religion or classics?
No, classics.
Classics. My other question is, I don't see that much difference between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church, except for the Pope. A lot of the rituals are the same.
Well, this was before that unfortunate day when the Pope announced that he was infallible. But
when Henry VIII...
it was these conflicts in England from the 17th century on were really acute. Well, really from the 16th century on. Mary and Elizabeth, for example, and it stemmed from there and continued hotter and hotter.
But is there that much difference in the rituals?
Well, no, a lot of it depends. The Anglican Church had high church and low church. And if you were very high church, people from the low church thought very badly of you and vice versa. And the high church practiced, although they used the English language instead of Latin, it was very similar. Yeah.
It wasn't so much a question of rituals, a question of Catholics or treasons. Yeah. It was a political issue.
It was a political thing, yeah. Henry wanted the monasteries and their money, for God's sake.
Yeah, but that was in the 16th century.
Yes.
The 19th century.
Yeah, well...
They had to worship in secret for centuries, practically. Definitely suspect.
People are funny about their religion. I mean, we're all subject to it one way or another. We see it all the time, how clannish people are. This is my tribe,
Yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't it be in some ways that
Hopkins was somehow attracted to Catholicism because of its, not just its ritual, but its whole idea of the visual imagination and art and the rest. And how, like, following Loyola, he could see images in his mind, and those images have this oscillation between pain and joy, between crucifixion and resurrection. And it appealed to basically his consciousness. And I think he immersed himself in that, and then he became Catholic, because the Catholic imagination does have quite a bit more of that, where the Protestant goes more towards the word, less imaginative, less visual, so that you find people...
Yes, although it is true that they were similar in a lot of ways.
Oh, there's a similarity, but even
No.
it's not quite as deep, you know, the idea of
No,
worshiping almost
the best churches are still the Catholic churches, you know, the really handsome ones, the great English cathedrals. I think that's true. It is true, by the way, that he was very fond of sketching. He did a lot of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, he was familiar with Ruskin's, a lot of Ruskin's work. He's
He was
very
very
interested in
familiar.
painting. He experimented.
That's true.
Yeah, and he was very interested in, in the reality of the, in the design of things. He was interested in architecture for a while, I think.
Yes, he's very interested in his journals, which we have up until 75. There were later journals, but they kind of got lost in the sauce somewhere. He goes to see a ruin and identifies the archaeological name for the various parts of the ruin. He exercised his power to learn things on architecture quite a lot, and he had strong feelings about it.
A couple of more questions because we want to leave time for Marie to read a few of her own thunder. Go ahead.
The notion here in Thou art indeed just, Lord, of questioning God's justice, is that an extended theme in...
No, it's not extended. This is the prime example of it right here. It's Job's cry, I mean, Jeremiah and Job and various other biblical greats. But he came to that point, and then you see at the end he sort of puts it all on his own back. It's really all his own fault.
Technically speaking, what do you think that are some things? I guess it would be a large subject, but what are some things that a writer or a poet could learn from Hopkins' style?
Well, the passionate love of language and the objects that language represents come right to mind. The other thing you can learn from him, especially if you don't do it like with the rhetoric handbook, his rhetoric is incredible. The reason that I cry when I get to the last line of Thou art indeed just is the rhetoric. He builds that rhetoric in. The sound of the line, by the time you get to that line, you've got tears streaming down your face. You can't help it.
Okay, now we're going to be honored by, do you want to read? And again, copies, I'm sure Marie would be happy to sign.
Actually, I'd like to read my Hopkins poem.
Okay, great.
I have two
great.
Hopkins poems.
Terrific.
One of them is slightly metaphysical. I don't have it. Oh, too bad. I didn't bring it. I will read you the one that came to me like a blessing. I woke up one morning. Oh, no, here it is. It's called, this is the dry one. Why Vow, it's called, and it is rather metaphysical. Hopkins, some say daft, holds that his self is unlost, a fact, unchanged by its unfolding, as it stands for his each act. Self, daft or not, lives out its vow. His now is a perpetual now. Obedient, he said he would. He did as he said. He did as he was told. He could, good as gold, hold good.
Could you read that again?
Yeah, would you, it's hard to follow. And we don't have it in front of us.
It is,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, okay.
It's called Why Vow. I want to remind you that although now we don't think of vows as really binding in the old way, up until, say, existentialism came along, a little earlier than that, people thought that vows, a promise made before God to do X or Y, were binding. And Hopkins, of course, was one of them. Hopkins, some say daft, holds that his self is unlost of fact, unchanged by its unfolding, as it stands for his each act. Self, daft or not, lives out its vow. His now is a perpetual now. Obedient, he said he would. He did as he said. He did as he was told. He could, good as gold, hold good. And this is the one that I woke up one morning with it, thinking it. And it was partly because of the word Cillian, which has always recurred to me with pleasure, because I looked it up and it was there, and I recognize it. So this is called Thank Gerard. Cascade, rain, torrential rain, waterfalls down our stone facade. Our fields, lately fire-parched, now glossy, cross the flat rise you plowed earlier. The whole length of one Cillian streak gleams. Gerard, cutstroke, the Cillian, the gash we have in mind is your mind. Lifting muck life, turned sunstruck to each side, silver shot at low sunset after the rain, every dropped cataract. Is not this the rain we have longed for, you and I? God, to you, hold him close folded above his Cillian, loft him, halo him, prize him high, pen in hand, his two uprooted feet flailing, awkward, rain-streaked, below his healing, blooded knees. There you go.
Could you read one? It was time. Could you read one more? Something current or something?
These are all from my new book, which will be out in September '09, and it's called Easy. Thank you. This is for my late friend, Helen DeMott, who painted waves. She was a wonderful painter. And she painted the surface of water. Wonderful designs, extremely abstract. It's called Skeptic, which she was. And it's in two voices, 1 and 2. The first voice, I watch the heaving, moving of great waters. I read their surfaces. Motion patterns them. Water expresses the seafloor it is moved by. Language thinks us. Myth or mouth, we migrants are its mystery. It's our attention floats those halcyons that we want to say are safe riding the wave swell on the surface of some sea. And this is the second voice in reply. Try telling that to the lookout sailor, his ship headed into the storm, headed for floundering. Oh, I believe in storms, all right, and in ships that sink or swim, and in some birds, some sailors. But a scupper of a place of peace, a nest-sized cupping, and 2 lovebirds calm in it. No matter how we want such peace, no matter who believes in it, mouth or myth, the tale of peace in a love nest in storm calm would only bewilder us crow's nest sailors looking ahead, about to drown.
That's great.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philoctetes events is available at philoctetes.org.